How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 9 of Hitting for the Cycle on the Empty the Bench podcast. I'm Hank Indictor, and joining me as usual is Ryan Touhey. Ryan, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
You know what? I'm doing pretty good. It wasn't as crazy of a week in baseball this week as, say, a week before, but nonetheless, we still got some pretty big news to talk about. But before I get into all the meat and potatoes of this, I'd like to give you a friendly neighborhood reminder. Please don't forget to follow us on all of our social medias. You can find us on Facebook, X, and Instagram, at HFTC And of course, if you want to follow this whole network, follow the Empty the Bench podcast network at ETB Network on, again, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. And of course, don't forget to follow our YouTube channel. You can find us at youtube.com/ETB Network. And just for good measure, don't forget to hit that big red button down below if you want to see more of our good shows, such as the 3&D, Fruity Cereal, and of course, the namesake show of the network. And last but certainly not least, make sure you follow the website etbpodcast.com for great blogs and more information as well. And I believe we got some more good blogs coming in for you this week. But anyways, without further ado, let's get right into this. The first big news that came up this week is that the New York Mets have announced that they will be retiring Doc and Darryl's numbers next season. Now, I mentioned this on my short video on the social medias, but this is an honor that is long overdue for the New York Mets. And look, you can say what you want about their careers and the what might have beens. The fact of the matter is, those two players had probably some of the biggest impacts on the history of the New York Mets. Whenever Doc would pitch every fifth day when he was very young, he was an absolute phenomenon. And Darryl, whenever he came up to the plate, he had that type of power that you just never knew what would happen. And not to mention, he was a true five-tool player. He I believe at least once or twice he was a member of the 30-30 club, and he probably should have won the MVP award in 1988. And as I said, we could talk about what happened with their downfall with regards to drugs, but if you look at the latter parts of their careers, even after they left the Mets, they still pretty much found ways to redeem themselves. But nonetheless, regardless of how you feel about the New York Mets, it's really nice that Steve Cohen has been taking the time to honor the alumni that previous ownerships, cough, the coupons, never really did a great job in doing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think both Doc and Darryl Strawberry are much deserving of this honor, so congratulations to the two of them. And obviously, it's been well documented, both of these guys are not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And yes, a valid argument could be made that their careers probably should have been a little bigger than what they were. But that being said, the two of them are two big significant pieces in the history of the Mets, like you mentioned. And they were a part of that golden age of Mets baseball from the mid-'80s to the late 80s, specifically from 84 to 88, when they were back on the rise after a couple of really, really bad seasons. Darryl Strawberry making his debut in 1983, Doc Gooden coming the following year in 1984. And really, the two of them were the cornerstones. They were the centerpieces of that mini run that the Mets had during the decade. You know, the team was constructed around those two specifically. And Doc Gooden winning the Cy Young Award in 1985 at the age of 20. It's one of the greatest pitching seasons of all time. And he was electric during that time period. Nobody could touch Gooden at that time. And Darryl had one of the sweetest swings in baseball. And those two were really big parts of the Mets, obviously. The two of them obviously were major contributors to them winning the World Series in 1986 and winning the NL East in 1988. And that was really the golden age of Met baseball, that mid-'80s to late 80s run that they had. And the two of them were major contributors to that. They would not have won that championship without either of the two of them. And so it's really nice to see the two of them get recognized for their contributions.
Yeah, and not only that, the Mets weren't just like the Kings of New York. You could find them pretty much everywhere. Like, because of Doc and Darryl, the Mets were like pretty much a countrywide phenomenon. Like, you would see posters of them all over New York. Like, I don't know how many books you read about the 86 Mets, but there was an example that their posters were even plastered right around the Bronx. You can imagine how George Steinbrenner probably felt about that. And Doc had an oversized poster that was on top of a building in New York City. And let me give you his numbers. 24-4 with a 1.53 ERA. Now, again, I know he never really had a season quite like that in 85, but even so, if you look at his numbers, he won 194 games, lost 112. He still had a winning percentage well over 600. And if you look at some of the other accomplishments that he had, there is a valid argument that he could be in the Hall of Fame, but I'm not necessarily one that would go that far. Nonetheless, despite all the issues they had afterwards with regards to cocaine and whatnot and alcohol abuse, like, I think what really should be remembered about them is that both of them have since recovered. I think Darryl really more so than Doc, because Darryl's now doing ministry work all over the country. But both of them are very much still alive, and both of them are still giving talks to really warn people about the dangers of that stuff. And both of them are still pretty much very, very much involved with the Mets, probably more so now that Steve Cohen is the owner. But I think those will definitely be great days. And I think both of them are actually going to get separate ceremonies. I don't know if it's going to be on the same weekend, but that's something we'll find out once the schedule comes out. But a big congratulations goes out to Doc and Darryl, probably two of the greatest players in Mets history. And I've still kind of had trouble deciding my Mets Mount Rushmore, but I can assure you that at least one of those two players will be on it. Spoiler alert, once I do that.
Yeah, easily. It's a big honor for the two of them, obviously, and it'll be a very memorable days for Met fans to celebrate and reminisce about those times, because, like I said, those were the golden ages of Met baseball. Those were the best teams that the organization had ever had.
I mean, yeah, pretty much. And obviously, I'd be remiss to mention they also both went on to have some pretty good success with the Yankees later on in their, albeit much later on in their careers. Yep. Darryl obviously wasn't the same star when he was there, but he still contributed. Neither was Doc, but they still both contributed with some big moments. Darryl had that home run in Game 5 of the '96 ALCS, and then he came back and hit that big home run against the Red Sox in '99, much after the Red Sox fans were taunting him mercilessly.
And that was the final home run he'd hit in his career.
Yep, and then you had the Doc no-hitter on May 14th, 1996. So,
in Seattle.
Pretty much legends, no matter how you say it. But in any event, let's move on to another legend, and with involving retirement. Although this one's more him announcing his own retirement in the end of his career. That's Stephen Strasburg, who was the star pitcher of the Washington Nationals. And Ryan, I don't know about you, but I would say really the moment the Nationals really started to change their culture was the moment that he made his debut. And I remember it very well. I believe it was around June 6, 2010. He struck out 14 Pirates in his debut. And remember, he was already hyped up to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he was drafted first. He was the first overall pick in the 2009 draft by the Nationals. And like you said, the culture was slowly beginning to change beginning that year. He was kind of like the starting point for the Nationals turning it around and turning into a respectable organization, because the year prior to that, they were horrible. They lost, I think, 103 games in 2009. And then once Strasburg came on board, they still weren't good in 2010 or 2011, but you could see some small flashes that they were starting to get the ball rolling a little bit. Obviously, Bryce Harper coming in 2012 bolstered the offense, and bringing in the veteran Davey Johnson who managed Doc and Darryl in New York. He comes to Washington and helps turn that franchise around, and they went to the playoffs a couple of times during the 2010s. And obviously, Strasburg was definitely the biggest reason why the Nationals went all the way in 2019. He obviously won the World Series MVP award in that series, in Washington's 7-game upset over the Houston Astros that series. And and unfortunately, in the offseason, he signed a 7-year contract that was worth $245 million. And unfortunately, the injuries just got him. He just could not get back on the field. He had a ton of setbacks, and he had problems with nerves in his pitching hands. That's really what started to derail him, and just kept him from pitching, really. And he had nerve issues there. He had a rib and 2 neck muscles removed. So he also underwent surgery for thoracic outlet syndrome, which ended his season in 2021. He made 1 start last year on June 9th and got rocked for 7 earned runs in 4 1/3 innings. And then he went on the injured list again with a stress fracture in his ribs. So poor guy just could not catch a break. And it's really sad that this is how his career is going to end, especially since he's still young. He's only 35. And it really is a shame that he never really got to build on his legacy from the 2019 World Series. It stinks. It really stinks, and it's sad to see that. It's sad to see how this is how his career is going to end. But hopefully the Nationals hold a nice ceremony for him.
Yeah, I have a few pitchers that you could really compare Steven Strasburg to. The first name that really comes to mind, and I know Nick and I kind of discussed this on one of those rare episodes where I filled in for Tom on Empty the Bench. We were comparing him to like certain pitchers. I think Nick said it was Mark Pryor, but I compared him more to Kerry Wood, because even though both of them had lengthy careers and both of them left a pretty good impact on the teams that they pitched for, well, with Kerry Wood, in Kerry Wood's case, mostly the Chicago Cubs, but I know he pitched for other teams. But at the end of the day, despite what happened, you still wonder what if with those guys, and you still wonder what more they could have accomplished with those injuries. And as far as Steven Strasburg goes, despite the injuries, I still don't think you can really look at his career as a failure, because 10 years as a mainstay on the Washington Nationals, and then it all comes full circle with him helping them to win the World Series. I think he's definitely one of the most important figures in Washington Nationals history, and
probably the most important.
Yeah, probably the most. I would go as far as to say that he probably should have his number retired when it's all said and done. But that's probably a debate for another day. And, the one really big what if that I look at with Steven Strasburg, though, is I'll still never forget that 2012 season and how great that Nationals team was. And it's funny, I actually just finished reading Davey Johnson's autobiography, and he said that team had a lot in common with like the 84, 85-ish Mets. But the only difference was they were very protective of Steven Strasburg's arm. And Ryan, you can't change my mind. I think babying him and pulling him and resting him for the season just to worry about the future with his arm was honestly the worst thing that the Nationals could have done. And I guarantee you, if you ask Davey Johnson, he will probably tell you the exact same thing, because it not only derailed their chances of winning that series against St. Louis Cardinals, but I feel like it just kind of messed with his psyche a little bit in the years following. But in any event, we'll never really know what could have happened. And nonetheless, he still was an important pitcher in Nationals history, and someone that I really enjoyed getting to see starts of when he was in his prime, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And in times of postseason play, obviously everybody is aching and they're banged up from a long, grueling baseball season. But you hit the nail on the head. In games of that magnitude in the playoffs, you have to not literally. I mean, you don't want to do it, but pitch till your arm falls off. Basically, go out with your best. I know that nowadays ball players get hurt much more easily than they did in the past. It's just the way the game is nowadays. There are a lot more IL stints, and pitchers throw harder than, especially pitchers, because they throw harder than ever before today. But yeah, when it comes time, when it's crunch time, you want to go. If you're going to lose with your best product on the field. So yeah.
And But yeah, that's pretty much all we have with regards to Steven Strasburg. But now let's talk about some of the more compelling baseball races. And we talked about this being the Wild Wild West, and you'll notice I put emphasis on the last four letters of this banner, and I swear I kind of did this on purpose, but Jose Altuve had a game during the 5-game winning streak the Astros had where he hit for the cycle, and as a result of that winning streak, and because the Mariners actually lost a game to the Oakland Athletics, they are back in. I'm technically going to count that as a 3-way tie because even though technically it's Seattle and Houston that are one game ahead of Texas, if you really look at the numbers all bunched up together, it's kind of a 3-way tie. And let me explain why. Because the Rangers and the Astros both are tied in the all-important loss column with 58. The only reason the Astros are ahead of them, of course, is because they have 2 more wins than the Rangers. And the Seattle Mariners are really only ahead by percentage points, and they are 1 game ahead of Houston in the all-important loss column. But in any event, I want to talk a little bit about Jose Altuve for a minute. Now, I know as a Yankee fan, I shouldn't really be praising Jose Altuve. In fact, if there's any fellow Yankee fan watching, I know you're going to probably want to get your knives and pitchforks out at me because, oh God, I'm actually praising Jose Altuve. Whatever is this guy doing? Well, listen, if we're being honest, say what you want about the scandals. He deserves every single bit of that praise that he can get. Ryan, he might honestly be the best second baseman of our lifetime. If not, at the very least, he's in my Mount Rushmore for the greatest second baseman that I have seen, for sure. Very clutch hitter. He has a flair for the dramatic. In fact, he also, not too long ago, got his 2000th hit. He's already got 6 Silver Slugger awards. He's already got 3 batting titles. I can't believe he only has 1 Gold Glove, but he also has that MVP from 2017. In short, if you look at his numbers right now and where he is, and I believe he's already been in the league for about 13 years, I think the argument can be made that he'd be in the Hall of Fame already if he were to announce his retirement today.
He's a Hall of Famer in my book, regardless of the fact that I'm a Yankee fan. And like you said, I don't really care about the whole sign stealing scandal in 2017. To me, that's not why the Yankees lost that series to Houston. They lost that series to Houston because they couldn't hit in Houston. And they had 4 games in Houston and they didn't win any of them. If they had won one of them, they would have went to the World Series. So I don't want to hear anything about the Astros and their sign stealing scandals and all that stuff. That's a lame excuse for me. And in regards to Altuve, he is one of the best baseball players that I've seen in my lifetime, and he is definitely the best second baseman that I have seen in my lifetime. And I can't really say anything bad about Altuve other than the fact that I can't stand him because he kills my team. He's a Yankee killer. He's one of the biggest Yankee killers I've ever seen in my lifetime. He hits a home run every single game, it seems like, he plays against the Yankees. But I can't help but admire the guy. He's talented. He's fast. The guy sure can hit. There's no doubt about that. And on top of that, he's a class act. He's a very class act. He never shows anybody up. He doesn't stop. He doesn't stare and admire his home runs, especially when he won the against the Yankees in 2019. He just started running around the bases. And he's been the face of the Astros obviously since 2013 or 2014 when he really started to come into his own and led the league in hits that year. And it's just another accolade you can add on top of his already impressive Hall of Fame resume. And like you said, he got 2,000 hits a little while ago, and he's only 33 years old, so 3,000 is not out of the question either. He could be the next guy to get to that milestone. I don't really see anybody else who's anywhere close to getting the 3,000 hits. I definitely think he'll get to that. And the Astros obviously coming off a sweep of the Red Sox at Fenway Park, and they are neck and neck with the Mariners and the Rangers at the top of the AL West. going to be an interesting month of September. I'll tell you that. It should be exciting baseball as those three teams are fighting for a bye to the first round of the playoffs. Nobody wants to play that wild card round, so those teams are going to be going after each other's throats. The Mariners, like I said in the previous episode, end the season with 10 games, 7 against the Rangers, I believe, and 3 against the Astros. So it's going to be the Mariners are going to have a grueling end to the season, but they have the best chance probably to do the work that they need to do in order to get the AL West title. But yeah, we still got another full month of the regular season to go, so we'll see how it goes.
So here's my 10 cents about the division race. I think definitely the teams are pretty much fighting to get that first place so that they can avoid that wild card round, if you know what I mean. I mean, that's pretty much my Captain Obvious take for you right there. But my thing, though, about that is I think regardless of who ends up winning it, you really have to be careful if you're counting out the Houston Astros. I know their pitching hasn't been quite as good as last year, but the fact that they are still in this and the fact that, you have Jose Altuve back, who's now healthy, because I didn't even mention he missed a good chunk of the first half of the season. And the fact that you're still getting a lot of reinforcements back, you're telling me that team, you can't tell me that team is not going to be dangerous come playoff time. And you want to know the other thing that really matters for the Astros? It's experience. They've been there. They've won it before. They already have 2 World Series championships under their belt. Not to mention they've also been there 4 times. And, hey, if you could even make the argument that they could have just as easily been to 5 World Series because they almost became the second team to pull a reverse sweep in a playoff series. But that being said, you got to give them credit where credit is due. And I don't care how many trash cans were really involved into the making of those championships. The Astros are a threat. And I think that cycle that Jose Altuve hit, and not to mention his 2000th hit of his career, if this really tells me anything, all it tells me is I want no part of the Astros going into the playoffs. I don't care even if they're a wild card team. Absolutely not.
Not at all. Like you said, the experience factor definitely plays a role. They really don't have anything to prove, to be honest. Like it's up to other teams around the league to prove that they can be beaten. The Astros, I mean, regardless of the Astros are going to make the playoffs one way or the other. They're either going to win the division or they're going to get in as a wild card. They will be there in October. There's no doubt in my mind. So, in my opinion, they have the least amount of pressure of any team going into the playoffs because they've already proven that they can win the World Series. So, my feeling is their motto is going to be, all right, beat us. Prove it. Let's see. They have a lot of confidence. They know they're good. And that's what you want your team to be like when it comes time for the playoffs.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They have that same. Remember how everyone thought the Yankees were feared for that same reason? Mm-hmm. They're essentially what we were back in the late 90s, and I would say up until the dreaded series that we don't talk about.
Yep.
So, yeah, I would say they have the Yankees, and I would also even argue they have that New England Patriots factor, if you know what I mean.
The Yankees also had a lot of pressure on themselves, though, during those 90 dynasty years because they actually had to beat some of their arch rivals in order to get to the championship. They had to beat I remember reading Joe Torre's book, The Yankee Years, and he mentioned that it's obviously, enjoyable, when you win the World Series, but the road there is torture. And they had to beat the Red Sox in 99. They had to get through the Mets in 2000, which he said was awful. And they had a lot of pressure put on themselves during that time period.
Yeah, because imagine if the Astros had lost that World Series last year. I think we'd be talking about them in a little bit of a different light.
Yep. I mean that's 2 worlds that would make it 1921. Yeah, that would have been 3 World Series losses and 4 tries. It would have been probably the equivalent of the 90s Braves.
And I want to talk about Texas for a little bit because, boy, have they had a bit of a free fall.
Mhm.
They have only won 3 games 3 times in the last 7 games, and 2 of those wins, actually, I should point out, they kind of got lucky because one of them they came back against the New York Mets, and then yesterday they ended up just missing out on a sweep because they ended up losing in walk-off fashion. Should
Yeah,
we be
walk off
worried
hit
about
by
them?
pitch.
Say that again?
Walk off hit by pitch.
Yeah, that's right. Are they a team that we have to worry about come September? You think they've peaked too soon?
I don't know exactly what to make of the Rangers. Obviously, they haven't been in the playoffs since 2016, and that was a completely different team. So I really don't know what to make of the Rangers. I mean, they have a lot to prove. I think this month they've really struggled recently, as you mentioned. They had a very tough August, but like I said, there's still another month to go in the regular season. I would like to see what their schedule is like for the month of September. That would be let me see who they have this month. Obviously, it's a dogfight in the West. So they came off that series against the Mets, and they lost 2 out of 3 to them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, hold on, I'm just looking this up.
I think I might beat you to it. I've got my schedule up there too, because you know how
Mhm.
I often always have
Yeah.
MLB.com. Yeah,
Mhm.
so let me read off what they have in September. They've got the Twins, which is winnable, although the Twins have been winning the division, but that's pretty
Twins
much
gave
by
them a hard
default.
time in Minnesota.
They did give them a hard time. And then you got the Astros. The A's are a team that, theoretically they should win against, but we've seen really crappy teams play spoiler in the month of September. So you really never know there. The Blue Jays, I still say, are pretty dangerous. They're going to be desperate for that wild card spot. Cleveland technically isn't out of the mix, especially because of the acquisitions they made. Then we'll get to that a
Mhm.
little bit later. The Red Sox might still be in it. We don't know for sure, but that they could be a tough out. And then you've got 3 games against the Angels sandwiched around 7, I believe 7 games against the Seattle Mariners. So
Yep.
I, we say that we're talking about Seattle having a gauntlet of a schedule. Other than maybe the A's, it's not like Texas has that much better of a path to get to the postseason either.
No, and I mean the teams that they're facing, they aren't like powerhouses per se, but they can still
Mhm,
beat you. Like they're not completely like like the A's where it's almost a guaranteed victory.
mhm.
Like teams like the Red Sox and the Blue Jays are going to be fighting, very hard for that for one of those wild card spots, and they're going to give the Rangers everything they have. So those are critical series that that these teams have those dates circled around on their calendar. It's going to be a fight because obviously you got these 3 teams, fighting for the division. They obviously don't want to go to that wild card series. And you also got the Rays, the Blue Jays, and the Red Sox. Not all of those teams. Those are 6 teams that I just mentioned. Not all 6 are going to make the playoffs. There's only room for so many teams. There's only room for 6 teams in total, and 2 of them are buys. So yeah, it's going to be a wild month.
All right. But now, with that being said, let's move over to the National League. And Clayton Kershaw made some history. He is now second all time in Dodgers wins by a starting pitcher. I could be wrong, but I believe number one, I'm pretty sure would have to be. I'm thinking probably Oral Hershiser.
I'm not sure. He tied Don Drysdale for second place all time in Dodger wins with 209.
Yeah, I'm
And
not 100% sure that it's Koufax because I know Koufax. Actually, no, I take that back. How can I forget about Don Sutton?
oh yeah, Don Sutton. He had a very long career. Since Sutton was a longtime Dodger, and he's a Hall.
Sidney Koufax isn't even in the top 10 or in the top 5 in terms of Dodgers wins.
Well, Koufax kind of had a short career. He had arm troubles, and that cut his career short, unfortunately. But yeah, Clayton Kershaw, second all time in Dodger wins with 209. That puts him in a tie for Don Drysdale. And he achieved that on Tuesday night as the Dodgers completely manhandled the Diamondbacks at Dodger Stadium this week. As a matter of fact, the Dodgers have basically manhandled everybody who they've faced this month of August. They're 24-4 this month, and they've pulled away in the National League West, and they're gonna win the National League West again. I think this is going to be, I mean, how many division titles is this like for them in the past 10 years? I think it's like 8 division titles in like 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, if I'm not wrong, I think 2021 was the only year they did not.
Yes. So like
the
9
division.
division titles in 10 years. This is going to be their 9th division title in 10 years. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's absolutely incredible. And Kershaw obviously is one of the greatest pitchers of all time. It's a shame that I don't really get to see him too often here on the East Coast, especially since we're Yankee fans and we don't really get to see him see his art history that much.
Mm-hmm.
But he's obviously one of the greatest pitchers of all time, a future Hall of Famer. And yeah, I mean the Dodgers have they have an plus 80 run differential in August. And like I said, they have a 14.5 game lead in the division. So they're going to get a bye in the playoffs. They're going to get there. And they actually begin a huge 4-game set against the Braves at Dodger Stadium tonight. That game is going to start in about an hour and a half on the West Coast. And so those two teams are fighting for that top seed in the National League playoffs. Both those teams would love to have home field advantage in the league championship series should they meet each other there. So it's a big series for both of them.
Yeah, no, and look, you got to give the Dodgers credit where credit is due, but I talked a little bit about this with Nick about a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to say this again. I'm sorry, but there's a reason I'm not going nuts over the Dodgers winning all those games. And it's not so much because the teams on their schedule are pretty inferior. I mean, look, to be fair, there really aren't as many great teams in the National League after the Dodgers and the Braves, and then that little mini cluster, you know what.
Mm-hmm.
Like, actually, no, I take that back. Most of the games the Dodgers really played were against their NL West division rivals, and other than the Giants, the rest of those teams are mid, and that's probably a nice way of me saying that they suck. But in any event, I've seen this movie before with the Dodgers, and the thing about them is, for me, unless I see them doing serious damage in October, I'm just not going to be easily impressed by them anymore. Like, I'm sorry, but they've had way too many serious chokes in October. Other than that one random year that they won the World Series, which, you know, you may or may not remember. It just so happened to be during the COVID bubble of 2020.
I mean, if they played a full season that year, to be honest, I think they would have won it. I think they were the best team.
I don't disagree necessarily, but it just, the fact that they won it that year when they've had so many other chokes in previous years, I don't know. You see why I'm not so bullish on the Dodgers. And if you look at their team overall, other than, even with Kershaw, can you really sit here, look me in the eye, and tell me that you trust their pitching going on a big run in October?
It's always their pitching that's a problem in the playoffs.
And not only is it their pitching, their bullpen sucks too. I'm sorry.
Those are always the flaws when it comes to the playoffs for the Dodgers. They have to rely on their offense to outslug the opposition in the playoffs, and they can only do so much. You know, when it comes time for playoffs, there's an old saying, good pitching will always be good hitting when it comes time for the playoffs. And the Dodgers, unfortunately, just as good as their hitting is, I'm not discrediting, you know, Betts or Freeman or any. I mean, those guys are elite. They're among the best hitters in the entire league. But, you know, like they don't. I don't know if they have the arms in that rotation or the bullpen, as you mentioned. And Kershaw, as great as he is, I mean, he's not exactly in his prime anymore. He's 35 years old. And I mean, his postseason track record is not that impressive either. I mean, he's had a nice start here or there in the playoffs, but for the most part, it's not that impressive. And yeah, I mean, whoever they face in the playoffs, I mean, I think I will say this: I think they will win the first round. I think they'll win the division series, regardless of who they play. But when it comes time for the LCS, because I do think it's going to be them and the Braves in the LCS. It's going to be a challenge. We'll see what happens, though. You know, you can't predict baseball, like the saying goes.
Yep. Well, it's funny. There actually is one team that I think could pose a sneak attack to the Los Angeles Dodgers, but I'm going to talk about them a little bit later. But before I do, I just want to make some interesting comparison. I don't know how familiar you are with Pokemon, Ryan, but in my opinion, Clayton Kershaw might be the pitching version of Ash Ketchum because he wants to be the very best like no one ever was. And while he's been great and he's a very likable pitcher, for reasons in and out of his control, he hasn't won the big one, much like Ash Ketchum until a much later season of Pokemon. So, yeah, there you go.
They did not.
But yeah, no, I just wanted to get that out there. And speaking of the Atlanta Braves, Ronald Acuña is now a home run away from being a member of the 30-60 club. Now, unlike the Dodgers, I am very much sold on the Atlanta Braves. Good Lord. Look at that lineup. It's like they don't even need their pitchers to like have a good game on a consistent basis, but they do. And they're just such a complete team that really the only question that you have to ask if you're a Braves fan is how are you going to handle September? Because the lead's so big and you have a somewhat comfortable lead over the Dodgers for the best record in the National League and home field advantage.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, the Braves haven't been weren't too shabby in August either. They were 20-8, so they've been almost just as dominant as the Dodgers have. And like you said, I mean, their lineup from top to bottom, there really are no weak spots in that lineup. And Acuna having one of the best seasons I've seen in the National League in a while, I should say, one of the best National League seasons I've seen in a while. I mean, 60 stolen bases is almost unheard of. I can't remember I can't remember the last guy who had 60 stolen bases off the top of my head. But I mean, obviously, he is the leader of that lineup. And come to think of it, I mean, how interesting would it be to see them and the Dodgers in the playoffs with Freddie Freeman on the Dodgers coming back to Atlanta? That'll make for an interesting script, to say the least. But I think, I mean, obviously, you can attribute a lot of the Braves' successes here to Acuna, rightfully so. He and it's between him and Betts for the National League MVP this year. But you also have Matt Olson in there, who has provided amazing power this year. The thing that impresses me the most about the Braves is how consistent they are. These guys play every single day. They rarely take any days off or rarely miss time with injuries. They are a very healthy team. They play with a lot of emotion and a lot of energy. They have a lot of enthusiasm. And yeah, they are definitely, I mean, their record speaks for itself. I think they're at 87 wins already at the end on the last day of August. So they're gonna win 100 games this year easily. So it's gonna be interesting.
The last player that stole 60, I believe that was D. Gordon. Well,
D. Gordon, yes, it
well,
was
now known as D. Strange Gordon, I should say. But let me ask you this little trivia question: do you know who the last player to steal 70 bases in a season was?
70 bases. Jacoby Ellsbury.
Bingo.
Nice.
You got it.
It was what, 2011?
Yeah, and the last Brave that I can think of that stole like this many bases, I want to say Otis Nixon because he low-key was a kind of a forgotten base stealing threat back in his day.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, he has been on fire, and I think the question you have to ask is who is your number one choice for the National League MVP? And to me, I don't really think there's a wrong answer. But given the historic circumstances of this season, I kind of have to give it to Acuna.
Absolutely. 30-60 seasons are very, very rare. I mean, he blows Betts out of the stolen base department. I mean, Betts leads Acuna in home runs. Betts has 36. That's his career high, by the way. He had his 36th home run on Tuesday evening. But like I said, when it comes to stolen bases, Acuna blows Betts out of the water. Betts, I think, only has 12 stolen bases this season.
Actually,
so when you have that
that 30, there has never been a 30-60 season.
There's never been a 30-60 season. So
care to guess who the closest player to getting 30-60 was?
30-60. I'm probably going to take too much time. Who would it be?
You would have been overthinking this. It's Ricky
Barry
Henderson.
Bond?
Ricky Henderson.
Ricky Henderson. That would have been my second guess.
No, Barry Bonds, I don't think Barry Bonds has come that close to 60 stolen bases in a season, even though he was a pretty
Probably
good
the
stolen base
40-40
guy.
season that he had in '96.
Yeah, no, I think that was the closest Barry ever came. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, I would definitely agree. Acuna has been absolutely fantastic. And now, Ryan, let me ask you one more question before we move on to the team that I think could pose a bit of a sneak attack. If you could pull a share and turn back time, and you're Alex Anthopoulos, would you still make the trade for Matt Olson and let Freddie Freeman walk?
Oof.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's kind of worked out for both teams in their own ways. Both teams haven't slowed down. They are both perennial teams. Honestly, I would. Olsen's a little younger than Freeman. I mean, don't get me wrong. Freeman's still one of the best hitters in might be the best pure hitter in baseball right now, and he's got one of the most violent swings I've ever seen in my life. But I honestly think it was as unpopular as it was for Brave fans. I think Brave fans have come to embrace Matt Olson, and I think Olson has a couple of more seasons. I think Freeman has a few more good seasons as well, but I think Olson, because he's a little younger, I think he has a little more in the tank than Freeman. Freeman is going to be 34, I believe, in September. So, yeah, I think it was a good move, and I think it paid dividends to both sides.
Yeah, again, there's really no wrong answer. I think the only way that question can truly be figured out is once we get to October and we see who makes a bigger run. But I don't know. There's a part of me that still wishes Freddie Freeman had stayed in Atlanta only because of his star power
Yeah.
in that city. But I mean, is Matt Olson really a bad alternative? I mean, it's not like, granted, they gave up 4 prospects in return, but they're now rotting away in the Oakland farm system. So, excuse me. And you know what I often say: prospects are prospects are prospects are prospects.
Yep.
What
Most
happens
likely they're
when
not going to be on the team in the future.
exactly? And I really don't know if what could even become of those prospects, if at all. And as I said, you don't really know. Freddie Freeman's also older, so you don't really know if he's going to decline eventually during the latter parts of that contract, whereas Matt Olson is still younger. So honestly, even though I see both sides, I would tend to lean towards Matt Olson. That's just me, though.
Yeah, I mean Freeman, even, like I said, even though he's going to be 34 soon, he isn't slowing down. He's still a hitting machine, and I still think he has another couple of good 300 seasons in him.
Yeah, I would agree. And by the way, there have only been 2 players that have had 30, 50 seasons. I also was just looking this up while we were having this
One's
discussion.
definitely Barry Bonds.
Oh yeah,
1990.
yes, Barry Bonds. You are absolutely correct about that. The other one, I don't know if you're going to get, so I'll just tell you that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Eric Davis.
Never would have gotten it.
Yeah, everyone forgets that Eric Davis had a lot of potential, like during the early years of his career. Anyways, as far as the Braves and how good they are, there's no question that they're going to win the division. But despite the fact the Phillies are trailing, I should point out that if Philadelphia was in the Central, they would probably be fighting tooth and nail with the Brewers, and I think ultimately they would win that division. And not only that, they've won, I want to say, like 7 of their last 9. I know they lost a close one yesterday to the Angels. This despite Bryce Harper hitting his 300th home run. And gosh, I wish Harry Kalas was still alive to call that home run. How awesome would that have been? That being said, out of all the teams in the wild card race, they're the only one that really is a sure thing to make it there. In fact, the only way they don't make it is if 1964 repeats itself, and even then, that would be pretty hard for them mathematically to not even make it to the wild card. And when you look at the Phillies, you got a really stacked lineup. You have a lot of players who hit 8 home runs in the month of August. That's not really getting talked about enough.
I mean, as a team, I think they broke the record. I think for the most home runs hit in August. They broke the August team record. I think they've hit close to 50. I think they've hit over 50 home runs as a team in August this month.
Well, not only that, but the Phillies have actually have probably had the highest winning percentage since the month of June, believe it or not.
It's not surprising to hear. Their offense has really picked up over
Like, I know they'd kind of gotten off to a middling start at the beginning of the season, but they have been quietly one of the hottest teams in the National League. And Ryan, are you ready for a bold take?
Go ahead.
Not only do I think that they're also going to be a tough out in the playoffs and would pose just as big of a threat this year as they did last year, if you put them against the Dodgers in a short series, I'm taking the Phillies.
I wouldn't criticize you for that. I mean, the Dodgers, we saw what a short series can do. I mean, anybody can beat anybody in a 5-game series. I mean, that's the Dodgers last year. They won 111 games, and they only lasted 4 against the Padres. So, the Phillies certainly could pose a threat to the Dodgers in the division series. They have those two teams, by the way, have faced each other a lot in postseason play, especially in the 80s. They met a couple of times at the end of the 2000s, in 2008 and 2009, and the Phillies have had their way with them. So, like the Dodgers, I don't know if they've ever beaten the Phillies in the playoffs, to be honest with you. Okay, twice.
77 and 78.
Oh, yeah, those two NLCSs, yes. But yeah, the Phillies are not afraid of anybody. They know they can hit. I mean, they have plenty of power. They have plenty of pop. They have plenty of power. But like the Dodgers, their biggest question mark is their pitching. Do they have enough pitching in that starting rotation? Do they have enough depth in that bullpen to get them all the way back to the World Series? Now, their pitching definitely stepped up last year, and that was a big reason why they went as far as they did last year. You just wonder if they can do it again this year.
I will say this, though. Nola and Wheeler have stepped it up big time.
Wheeler has been phenomenal. He has been absolutely fantastic.
And by the way, if I think if you're the Mets, you really must be kicking yourself letting him go to a division rival.
I don't think Met fans are happy about that at all.
No, he's been thriving, and I'm not really all that surprised. I think because we saw the flashes of greatness that he had with New York, but now with the Phillies, he's absolutely thriving. And yeah, I think if they're starting in a series against the Dodgers and the Dodgers lose one of those games, then in a short series, it gets really dicey.
Especially since the series would begin in Los Angeles. If they take one of those games in Los Angeles, they come back to that rowdy crowd in Philly who will be swarming those white and red towels all over the Dodgers. Like, it becomes a very intimidating environment. And we've seen teams who can't handle that kind of environment before. So, yeah.
I actually just planned a weekend trip to Philadelphia to see their ballpark for the first time for September.
Oh, you've never been there?
Surprisingly, out of all the ballparks I've been to, that's the closest to me that I have not been to yet. But I just wanted to stall with that tangent because now I think it's finally time that I blow off steam on this, because before we end the show, I think we have to talk about one of my quote-unquote favorite owners that I've bashed on. There have been 3 guys that I've bashed on in blog form.
It's not
one of them. Not surprisingly, I've bashed on Hal Steinbrenner, and for good reason. John Fisher, I've written 2 articles about, so you know pretty much how I feel about that.
Rachel Phelps in a suit.
Oh, God. Yes, that's exactly what he is. Rachel Phelps in a suit, or a human version of Mr. Krabs. Take your. But if you want to talk about a guy who just doesn't know what to do with his money, or he does spend money, but it goes in the wrong way, it's Arte Moreno. And I would say that, like I said last time, he is the Pete Rose of major league owners. And why do I say that? Because look at some of the players that he acquired at the deadline. One of them was Lucas Giolito. And remember, this is the same owner who decided, oh, we're not going to trade Shohei Ohtani. We're treading water, but that's okay. With all the extra wild cards, we can afford to keep him. Nothing bad's going to happen as a result of this. Well, guess what? Not only did Shohei Ohtani get injured, they ended up deciding to waive at least 5 guys after having just traded for some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously. what he did at the deadline, that would be like, Ryan, if you or I were to go play poker at, say, either Mohegan Sun, Atlantic City, Las Vegas, or whatever. One of us decided, oh, I've got a 16 showing, I'm playing blackjack. How about you hit me?
Yeah, I mean, he took a risk. He took a risk, like you said. That blackjack analogy is perfect to describe what the Angels endured. I mean, they went on a nice little run. I mean, I think they were at one point like 7 games over 500, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. And then they went on a very long losing streak. I think they lost what was it, like 8 in a row or something like that. I forget exactly how many games they lost. I think it was like it was this month, or the beginning of the month or something like that. But they the Angels just cannot catch a break in any way, shape, or form. No matter who is on that team, no matter the star power. Part of it, I guess, is luck. Is bad luck at the same time. But yeah, I mean, but given how stacked the American League West is, the fact that there are 3 teams ahead of you, and it's a gauntlet, and there are only 6 spots available for the playoffs, and you got other teams in the American League East fighting for it. It's a little confusing as to why Moreno didn't exactly do anything at the deadline, and why now he's waving off these players, as we enter the final month of the regular season. And the fact that he could have, gotten some. I think he could have gotten some night. I mean, teams would have given up an arm and a leg for Shohei Ohtani. I mean, as phenomenal as Ohtani is, I mean, the Angels could have gotten a lot back in return, and that could have helped them for the future. Because for the past, ever since Ohtani made his debut in Major League Baseball in 2018, the Angels have marketed themselves around Ohtani and around Trout, around these 2 superstars, 2 of the best players in the game, the 2 best players in the game, arguably. And it just has, that's all that they have to show for it. They got nothing to show on that team, whether it's defensively, offensively, pitching wise, and it's coming back at them. And it's going to be a real stinger because I don't see Ohtani coming back next year. I mean, it couldn't have ended any worse, I think, for Moreno this season.
Yeah, no, I would say I feel bad for the Angels. Well, actually, I guess I could say I feel badly for the Angels, and I would say I feel badly for their fans. But contrary to what you might think, I don't feel bad for Mike Trout because I'm sorry he accepted a deal with the devil, and I feel bad for him health wise. But for
Oh, yeah.
taking that big contract, no, you accepted all this money. You're stuck in what I would ironically call hell, given the name of their team. And
Hell's Angels.
yeah, yeah, no, I don't feel bad for him. Anthony Rendon, come on, really? You want me to feel? I'm supposed to feel bad for a guy that's being paid a lot of money to fight off Oakland A's fans? No. But do I feel bad for Ohtani? Yes. And I do feel bad for the A's fans who've had to deal with Arte Moreno, because I'm sure they probably hate the fact that they have an owner who thinks that Anaheim is a curse word. Not to mention that this is the same owner who you can probably blame Perry all you want, and I don't really know how good or bad of a GM Perry is, and the reason being is because, again, based on past history, Arte Moreno is a notorious meddler. So, what other choice do I have but to blame Arte Moreno for this?
You don't really have much of a choice. He's the one who constructed this team.
I'm of the belief, I truly believe, that if someone shows you who they are, believe them. And that's essentially what I think of Arte Moreno. And the other thing I want to say is, of all the teams to pick up Lopez, Giolito, and Matt Moore, Cleveland? Really?
Yeah, it's a little bizarre. It's a little. I mean, Cleveland is not out of it. I mean, mathematically, they're not out of it. They're 5 games back of the Twins, in a very, very weak Central Division. Whoever wins that division is going to have to play the wild card round. So
And I don't even know if they make it past whoever wins that one.
Yeah, it might be the weakest division winner in a while. So I don't know exactly why. Well, I guess Cleveland is like for me, the way I'm interpreting this is Cleveland saying, you know what the hell, let's go for it. What do we got to lose? So
the only problem is, how is it going to fix their offense?
That offense is not good.
But yeah, no. Once again, I hope if Shohei Ohtani pulls the same thing as Albert Pujols, Mike Trout, and Anthony Rendon, and accepts that deal with the devil, I, along with many other baseball fans, are going to be screaming absolute bloody murder that you would accept all that money from a guy who I'm pretty sure is a degenerate gambler.
Well, when Ohtani came to Major League Baseball in 2018 and he announced his intentions to sign with the Angels, I think a lot of people were shocked. I thought people would expect him to go to a team that was, ready to compete now mode. The Angels weren't ready to compete in 2018. I mean, sure, they had Trout, but their team was not that impressive to look at. And when I hear people saying free Ohtani, I'm like, he was the one who chose to play there. That was his choice. So,
oh, right. I forgot he already did accept an earlier deal with the devil, but he does have a chance to make amends.
So yeah, this is his chance to make amends. If he wants to be on a winning team, if he wants to play for a contender, I'm sure the Dodgers will be calling him. I'm sure the Mets will be calling him. I know that he prefers West Coast over East Coast. But we'll see what he decides to do next year. One way or the other, he's probably not gonna pitch next year with that torn UCL. But I don't think that'll detract teams from throwing a boatload of cash on his lap. But we'll see what happens. And as far as Moreno goes, like at this point, I just don't really care. Like no matter what, I feel like no matter what he touches, it's just gonna blow up in his face at some point. I feel like he's lost the touch. He's not. This isn't 2008, 2007, 2009, 2005. Those years are over. There's not those personalities. Those players are gone.
Yeah, we should have realized. I think Tree said it best in his video. We should have realized after he went after the Vlad Guerreros and the Bartolo Colons that this guy was going to be the type of guy that splurges regardless. But at the same time, remember, they actually had a really good farm system once upon a time. And gee, I wonder who's responsible for fucking that up.
This guy's name.
Again, if you want to learn more about that, go read my blog, which I'll probably read my blog about that, which I'm going to be plugging again soon, shameless me. But before we go, Ryan, always a pleasure talking baseball with you. And honestly, I think you pretty much know I can't wait to run it back next week.
Same here, Hank. It's always a pleasure to get to talk baseball with you as well.
And before we go, I'd like to remind you guys, please don't forget to follow us on all of our social medias. You can find us on Facebook, X, and Instagram at HFTC ETB. And of course, don't forget to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network at ETB Network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. And please do us a solid and hit that red button. Or better yet, if you want to find our YouTube channel, just go and look at this link below, youtube.com/ETB Network. And I mentioned there's a lot of good stuff coming out for you within the coming weeks and well beyond that. And last but not least, I mentioned that I've written a blog not too long ago. Well, where can you read that blog, you may ask? Well, just look at the website down below, etbpodcast.com. You get more good blogs and information there as well. And on behalf of Ryan Touhey, I'm Hank Indictor. I will see you guys next week for the double-digit episode of Hitting the Cycle. Wow, time flies. Anyways, see you later, guys.